This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick update on the markets. Now, third quarter of 2021 is looking rather dismal for the key South African indices, down 3.3% on the top 40, 3% lower on all share from the 1st of July to date. But on a year-to-date basis, Kenya's NSE 20 and Ghana's Composite Index are looking pretty good, up 10% and 44% higher. Away from the continent, though, the big news in the markets is that has to do with Apple. Its shares are down at least 2.4% at 17:15 GMT, following a ruling that essentially compels the tech firm to change how it handles payments on the App Store. In essence, that ruling forces Apple to allow developers to send users to other payment systems instead of only having to make those payments through the App Store. It's knocked off roughly $80 billion off the market cap. Here's what's coming up tonight. Tanzania has now ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area. Central banks across the world are building up an appetite for digital currencies, but what does that mean for you? The UK government task force is recommending the removal of human review of decisions made by algorithms. All that and more is in the pipeline for you tonight. But let's start on the East African continent, specifically with Tanzania. The government over there has announced that the East African state has signed up to the Continental Free Trade Area. Lawmakers over there ratified the CFTA agreement on Thursday, 2 years after the former president John Magufuli signed the treaty. The ratification is an indicator of President Samia Suluhu Hassan's intent to refocus on regional integration. Now, the CFTA hopes to double intra-African trade, which roughly accounts for about 18% of trade volumes at the moment, by removing non-tariff and tariff barriers on a broad range of goods and eventually on services too. The agreement entered into force on the 30th of May 2019 after the required minimum of 21 of the African Union's 55 member states ratified it. Trading under CFTA rules formally started on the 1st of January 2021 after a 6-month delay. We're still in Tanzania. Companies over there may be losing out on a major crude oil pipeline project that's connecting oil fields in Hoima in western Uganda to the coastal port town of Tanga. That at least is a warning from Tanzania's Energy Authority, which says over 2,000 Ugandan companies are already bidding for construction contracts compared to a far smaller number south of the border. With the details, here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo.
A database of local businesses in the energy sector has revealed that Tanzanian companies are cautious about bidding for big oil and gas construction contracts. The Energy and Water Utility Regulation Authority, EWURA, says that by July this year, only 779 local companies had been listed in the EWURA database, and only those registered will have the opportunity to participate in the Uganda oil pipeline construction. Officials at the agency have called on local companies to seize such opportunities. Although negotiations for the East African crude oil pipeline started in 2017, it has taken close to 3 years to begin construction due to numerous contentious issues to resolve. Construction of the $3.5 billion pipeline is now expected to start following completion of paperwork by government negotiation teams from both Tanzania and Uganda. Data from analytics firm Global Data projected Uganda will produce first oil as early as 2025. According to the Tanzanian government, about 80% of the 1,445-kilometer-long pipeline will run through Tanzania and create more than 18,000 job opportunities for locals. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
A fresh wave of protests at oil fields and ports is threatening to derail months of stability in Libya. Demonstrators over there have been calling for the dismissal of the head of the National Oil Corporation, Mustafa Sanala. This comes as a conflict over who actually runs the country's oil sector continues to grow between Sanala on one hand and Libya's oil and gas minister, Mohamed Aoun, on the other. Libya's crude production has recently been hovering around the 1.1 to 1.2 million barrels a day mark, but officials expect that output to drop by as much as 800,000 barrels a day in the days to come due to these disruptions. Onto a commodity of a different sort. The East African Tea Traders Association says that the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan is yet to hit tea exports to the country. That Commodities is getting into the African market mainly through Pakistan, where there have been no disruptions. Afghanistan purchased roughly $18 million worth of Kenyan tea last year, but direct shipments to the African market have declined steadily over the years. CGTN's Nick Modimba now reports.
Tea accounts for an estimated 30% of Kenya's exports to Afghanistan. Political, security and economic uncertainty that has engulfed the country after the Taliban takeover, however, hasn't disrupted the supply.
If the financial services continue to operate, we don't see any declined demand for tea. That's the situation right now. And even in situations of turmoil, still the citizens continue taking tea. That's the consolation we can have.
According to the World Integrated Trade Solution, Afghanistan has been actively importing different products from at least 14 African countries, such as vegetables, textile and clothing, chemicals, both consumer and intermediate goods. The decline in Kenya's overall exports to Afghanistan coincided with an atmosphere of uncertainty regarding difficult security, political and economic transitions which pervaded the country since the beginning of 2013.
We haven't been affected so much because over the years, previously Afghanistan used to be in the top 10 tea importing countries, but that has since changed. The tea production actually used to be, the tea consumption used to be about 44 million kilos in 2011. But this went down to as little as about 4 million kilos in 2020. In terms of value, the tea consumed was worth about 13 billion in 2011. This again has dropped down to about 1.6 billion in 2019 and 2020. So you can see there are already been demonstrably reduced demand of tea from Afghanistan.
All eyes will now be on the developing trade ties Afghanistan has with the countries after a new interim government was formed. Nick Modimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
All right, then a quick run through some company headlines. Let's start on the world of aviation. Comair, which operates the Kulula.com and the British Airways franchises in South Africa, has sold its slow business lounge enterprise to First Rand Bank for about $18 million. Comair went into business rescue in May 2020. It resumed operations on the 1st of September after having suspended flights on the 5th of July. Now, the airline operator was hit by the prohibition of all non-essential travel in and out of Gauteng province due to adjusted level 4 travel restrictions. AutoCheck, it's an automotive tech firm facilitating auto financing across Africa. It's reached an agreement with Ringier One Africa Media to acquire the online car platforms Cheki Kenya and Cheki Uganda. The deal is expected to be finalized in the weeks to come. It'll essentially see Cheki Kenya and Uganda's operations integrated into the wider AutoCheck operations. AutoCheck was launched last year and it's backed by some interesting investors, including TLCom Capital and 4DX Ventures as well. Speaking of car production, Ford is ending production in India. It's taking a hit of $2 billion as the car maker withdraws from one of its 3 largest markets. Now, Ford is basically saying that 2 of its plants in the cities of Sanand and Chennai will close in the months to come, and the company will work closely, it says, with employees affected by this move. Ford set up shop in India in 1995. It's invested more than $2 billion in the country in the last 25 years. And Toyota has also slashed its production outlook again for this year by roughly 3% amid a deepening semiconductor supply crisis after a resurgence of COVID-19 cases in Asia. The world's #1 automaker by volume now expects to produce 9 million vehicles in the fiscal year through March. That's down from an earlier forecast of 9.3 million vehicles rolling off its production line. The company is still sticking to its forecast, however, of an operating profit of some $22.7 billion this year. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Plenty more content in the pipeline, including this. We'll explore why central banks around the world are building up quite the appetite for digital currencies. And inflation in Egypt has jumped by over 6%. It's at the highest level since 2020.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Now, over 80% of central banks around the world are exploring the opportunities offered by a kind of digital currency. Formerly, they're referred to as central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs for short. It's not exactly the easiest thing to roll off the tongue, but keep that in mind because you're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the future. The thing is, though, small economies in the Caribbean, in Africa, they're right at the forefront of this exploration. The Bahamas, for example, became the first country in the world to roll out its CBDC. It's known as the sand dollar. Within the continent, 6 countries are exploring CBDCs. That includes Eswatini, Mauritius, Rwanda, South Africa, and Kenya. All of those are in the research stage. Ghana, of course, is developing the e-cedi. But what exactly are CBDCs and what makes them unique compared to, say, traditional crypto? Well, among other things, they issue directly by a central bank, and unlike, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin, they're backed by the country's FX reserves. But like those cryptocurrencies, they run on blockchain tech. And depending on the design, the central bank can see significant amounts of data on transactions flowing from one party to the other. They can even set limits in near real time on transaction prices and volumes. Perhaps they can even decide if a CBDC should be interest-bearing or not, and much more. Central banks across the world clearly are very interested in digital currencies, but you've got to ask, what is the attraction for small and frontier economies?
They have a unique set of circumstances where really the central bank digital currency really fits well with their needs. It's able to provide financial inclusion to people on remote islands that don't necessarily have easy access to a physical bank, particularly after a hurricane or a storm. So they have that access to continue their transactions without the physical bank being there. They also have, a lot of small states are really impacted by correspondent banking losses and de-risking, and central bank currencies is a form of response to that.
Okay, so how then do we deal with the competition or potential conflict of interest issues? Because when I hear central banks saying this will make payments a lot more efficient, the corollary of that is that it might imply that the central bank is getting into the payment space as well to some extent. If you're talking about a CBDC that's essentially aimed at the retail space, not the wholesale space. So how do we deal with that competition issue?
I think it sort of depends on how the central bank itself sets up the parameters around the introduction of this technology. So, the way that it's being done in the Bahamas, which is one of the few examples that are out there. A lot of this is a lot of theoretical talk at the moment because there aren't that many that are actually really engaged. But in the Bahamas, the way that it's been set up, it is very contained. So no one actually holds any deposits with the central bank itself, but really, you get the currency through third parties. There's a cap on the amount of money you can hold in your wallet and the number of transactions that you can do within a particular period of time. I think it's about a month. You can do a certain number of transactions a month. And so, it really, the risks and the benefits depend on how this is, how the regulator has set it up and what they want to get out of it and how they sort of control the use of it or not. So it really depends really.
And I know I'm stretching this a little bit into deep theoretical territory, but in an environment where the central bank, in theory, could essentially issue these wallets, it could handle the tech end of it for distributing these e-wallets, see who has got how much money in their wallet and what transactions are made across specific amounts of time. They could set up negative interest rates, perhaps as real-time incentives to convince people to get out there and spend money. In that sort of environment, then what are banks good for?
I mean, that's a good question, and I don't know if I think that any central bank is necessarily interested in competing with commercial banks or interested necessarily in getting involved in that aspect of it and that end of it. But there's only been there aren't many examples to draw on here to really say definitively what they will and won't do, but there are a lot more countries exploring it and a lot more, I would say, developing countries that are taking it a bit further, faster than your advanced economies are. And I think really they're looking to address this financial inclusion gap.
Could the argument be made that this is just also partly a response to what we've seen in the last 2 years, the rise of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum being used for transactions, but also as a speculative asset class, but just as important as a response to the potential loss of monetary sovereignty in the face of cryptocurrencies like Libra, or Diem as it's now called, being brought to market by entities like Facebook?
I mean, I definitely think there is an argument to be explored there. And I think that it's without a doubt that, the growth of these currencies, particularly Facebook's Libra or Diem, as you said, has really driven central bankers to act. Whereas before they were, taking it slowly, weren't paying that much attention. But I think it's not as simple as just to say that this is just a response to that, a reaction to that, because really, they could easily ask the government to legislate in a certain way to ban the use of cryptocurrencies. But I think central banks are seeing the value that this new technology can bring, that digital currency can bring, and they want to get the best out of that. And so while these other currencies might have spurred them on, I think, they also see that there's an inherent value to make payments and the financial sector a little bit faster, a little bit cheaper, a little bit safer, and more accessible. And I think, that they are really trying to capitalize on that as well.
On to North Africa. Egypt's annual headline inflation rate jumped to 6.4% in the month of August, double the rate recorded in the same month of 2020 at 3.6%. That is the highest reading since December 2020. The country's statistics agency attributed a hike to an increase in the price of furniture and maintenance services. That's up nearly 2.6%. Healthcare services up 2.4%. Other services whose costs increased over the period included education in restaurants and hotels, transport, food and beverages. On the other hand, the monthly headline inflation rate marginally fell in the month of August, down about 0.1%. Earlier this week, Fitch slashed Egypt's real GDP growth forecast by around 10 basis points to 3% in 2021, but it maintained Egypt's inflation forecast at 5.1%. Plans are underway for Egypt to supply Lebanon with much needed natural gas that will be supplied through pipelines running through Jordan and Syria in order to ease a crippling power crisis there. The plan is part of a multi-nation effort to address Lebanon's crippling power shortages using gas from Egypt. CGTN's Yasser Kim has the details.
Lebanon is living in the dark. The government is nearly bankrupt without enough foreign currency to buy fuel and natural gas to generate electricity, leaving vital sectors on the verge of collapse.
Today, we're having a double problem where it is the Lebanese authorities are not able to provide electricity. At the same time, the private generators are not able to provide electricity. So therefore, there are many hours where people are left without electricity at all. And therefore, this is having an impact on directly on the internet connection because it is cutting. And therefore, people are being disconnected from the outside world. So we need like up to 4,000 megawatts. Today, at one point, they were generating like less than 1,000 megawatts. And this is why we were having these problems.
Lebanese officials are trying to find the least costly solution to this problem. Neighboring Iraq has committed 1 million tons of fuel oil for 1 year. And now Egypt, being self-sufficient in natural gas, is ready to export its surplus to the Asian nation.
The plan is to generate electricity in Jordan using Egypt's natural gas. This electricity will then be exported directly to Lebanon from Jordan through Syria. Also, Egypt will directly send natural gas to Lebanon through Jordan and Syria, which have agreed in the deal.
The Arab gas pipeline linking the three countries is already in place and can transport natural gas when needed. However, there is one main challenge.
The security situation in Syria is worrying. How can Syria protect the pipeline running from Jordan, and how can it protect a route to Lebanon? The problem is there can be some terrorist attacks from terrorist groups in the region. However, any damage to the pipeline can easily be fixed if there are technical teams in place with the relevant equipment. That's very important. If they're available, it will only take a few hours to fix the damage.
Once the plan is given the go-ahead, the agreement will go a far way into solving Lebanon's electricity shortage.
The plan is if the Iraqi fuel goes into several power plants and the gas from Egypt to the Deir Ammar power plant, and then electricity directly through the grid to the Bekaa part, so therefore you have then a possibility to increase the generation, and therefore that means that you will have electricity given definitely not 24 hours, but close to what we used to get before, like maybe 16, 17 hours.
Lebanon has huge quantities of untapped natural gas reserves, but experts say solving Lebanon's energy crisis for good will not happen until there is a stable government with a clear economic policy and revenue to invest in this vital sector. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
On to Nigeria, this also is a gas story. The price of liquefied petroleum gas over there has gone up by over 80% in the last 8 months. Now, the price increase in LPG is forcing citizens to look for alternative energy sources, specifically firewood and charcoal. But, as CGTN's Kelechi Mekalamna reports, health and environmental experts are deeply concerned that these options are hazardous to people's health and they're destroying the environment.
It's almost dinner time at the Danjuma home, and 42-year-old mother of 5, Abigail Danjuma, struggles to flame up the firewood for her cooking, an alternative to which she's resorted owing to the soaring price of cooking gas. A 12.5 kilogram cylinder of cooking gas rose from 3,200 naira in August of 2020 to an average 6,000 naira now. For families like Abigail Danjuma's, cooking gas has become a luxury they can no longer afford.
The price of gas has doubled. We can't even afford to refill our cylinders. That's why we choose other cooking alternatives. We usually buy for 200 naira, which lasts for several days. However, the challenges of using firewood is the smoke which chokes us and makes us cough. It also affects my eyes.
Over 90 million of Nigeria's 200 million strong population live below the poverty line of $1 a day. It's exacerbated by the COVID-induced unemployment, rising inflation, among other factors, leaving many like Abigail with cooking options that put them at risk of falling sick.
The lungs have their own defense mechanism. They tend to have a way of bringing out sputum, which we cough out, and clearing the airway. When someone has inhaled smoke for a long time, this defense mechanism of the lungs tend to be reduced. And so the person is more susceptible to viruses and bacterial infections of the lungs. So even though we've not yet done studies, but we can say that it could worsen the effects of corona for people who get exposed to the virus, or it could also, make people more susceptible.
Aside the health hazards, the environmental safety is also being threatened.
One of the major causes of climate change, that is the use of firewood. Any country that depends solely on firewood for energy is actually causing danger to its citizens and to its own environment. When you pollute the environment with smoke, it rises, it depletes the ozone layer, and exposes us to more dangerous rays, from the skies. It also depletes the soil fertility because the topsoil is burnt off through this unregulated burning of either trees or bushes. And since the soil is threatened, you see that even the fertility of the soil is compromised.
Gas marketers, in a statement, attributed the rising cost of a commodity to the government's reimposition of VAT on imports. Nigeria produces only 40% of its total gas consumption. The rest is imported. But the government says it's rolling out an elaborate plan to boost the use of gas from 5% to 90% over the next 10 years. It's a plan that would steer people away from the use of harmful cooking fuels to more efficient and cleaner energy sources. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo say that copper and cobalt sales over there rose significantly in the first half of 2021 compared to the same period last year. The country's mineral sector took a nasty hit when global prices plunged at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's CGTN's Chris Ochamringa with the data from Kinshasa.
After a very difficult 18 months because of the pandemic, the DRC's Ministry of Mines says the sale of copper and cobalt has risen by 10% and 15% respectively compared to 2020. The price of copper reached a record high earlier this year thanks to improved industrial activity in China, the world's largest consumer. Revenues from the mineral dropped significantly in 2019 due to low levels of demand. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic further led to a slump. The DRC is the largest producer and exporter of copper in sub-Saharan Africa. It's also the world's biggest cobalt producer. The mineral is used for making batteries for cell phones, computers, and electric cars. A high demand from the electric vehicle battery sector has boosted cobalt prices since the beginning of this year. Financial experts expect the prices to remain high for the rest of the year. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
On to a story about vaccine mandates, but not from the country you're thinking of. Zimbabwe's government is insisting that everyone who's working in the public sector must either be vaccinated or risk losing their jobs. That's despite its mandatory inoculation directive being challenged as we speak in court by the country's largest labor union. Here's Farai Makutuya with the details from Harare.
Zimbabwe's Justice Minister says the government has not shifted its policy on voluntary COVID-19 vaccinations. He says civil servants are free to choose not to get the jab, but should seek employment elsewhere.
If you choose, which is your choice, to work for government, there are rules that pertain to government employees. If you want to be part of that group of civil servants, you must abide by the rules that pertain to that group. For the protection of fellow workers and the generality of the people, we are saying if you are employed by the state, you must get vaccinated.
There is no law making vaccination mandatory here. Some legal experts argue that enacting one would be unconstitutional because it would infringe on fundamental rights that cannot be taken away in any context, including a relationship between an employer and their employees.
So in this case, that will undermine human dignity quite seriously for government to do that. So they will be infringing Section 51 of our Constitution. They will also be infringing Section 52, which does provide that you cannot be subjected to some scientific experiment, because under the current scientific knowledge relating to vaccines, no one can say 100% that a certain thing has to happen so that certain things happen as well.
The Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions has sued 8 companies that have asked their employees not to report for work unless they are vaccinated, calling the move discriminatory and an unfair labor practice. A ruling is expected soon. Whichever way it goes, it's unlikely to calm the heated debate over this contentious matter.
I would not want to speculate. I will wait and see which court would now regulate how we relate at our workplace, which is within the confines of the Constitution. The Constitution does not bar us from having regulations and standard operating procedure manuals at a workplace.
The government has accelerated its vaccination drive in recent weeks. By September the 9th, nearly 1.8 million people had been fully inoculated. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. A UK government task force is recommending the removal of human reviews of decisions made by algorithms. And the European Central Bank will slow down its bond purchase program as inflation rises.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the programme. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Guinea, the opposition leader in the country, Cellou Diallo, has expressed his support for the military junta's move to overthrow the government of Alpha Condé. He says he was willing to work with the military junta. It's a major endorsement for the political class, for coup leader Mamadi Doumbouya. Alpha Condé had only been re-elected for a third presidential term last November. The African Union has suspended Guinea in the wake of Sunday's coup d'etat. In Nigeria, the army says it seized 14 tons of fertilizer, which it believes was to be used in making explosives by the terror group Boko Haram. The seizures were made at two locations in the country's northeastern states of Borno and Yobe. Nigeria Army spokesperson said that the fertilizer was supplied by a syndicate that provided materials to insurgents for the manufacture of improvised explosive devices. And finally, Tunisia's President Kais Saied plans to suspend the constitution and may amend the political system through a referendum. Now, over 6 weeks ago, as you might recall, the Tunisian president seized wide-ranging governing powers. He's yet to declare, however, his precise long-term plans for the North African state. That's the run through your headlines. The European Central Bank kept its monetary policy essentially unchanged on Thursday. The ECB, however, did opt to slow down the pace of net asset purchases under its pandemic emergency purchase program. Markets had been eagerly awaiting the institution's latest policy decision for signs of an imminent unwinding of pandemic-era stimulus amid surging inflation and strong economic growth. Ryan Thompson has this report from Frankfurt.
Well, for the first time since the start of the pandemic, the European Central Bank will slow the pace of its $2 billion emergency asset purchasing program. The ECB leadership met Thursday here in Frankfurt and ultimately decided that the economic outlook across Europe has improved enough to support the decision to buy fewer bonds for the rest of the year. Of course, such a significant decision normally jitters markets, and in the days leading up to this meeting, we've seen the main European indexes close in the red. But the ECB president, Christine Lagarde, emphasized that this decision was only a gear shift and not a quick stoppage. Speaking to journalists, she highlighted her own words many times over that purchasing would continue, just at a moderately lower pace. And the ECB was just recalibrating its own pandemic response.
We are recalibrating just as we did back in December and back in March. We're doing that on the basis of the framework, which is a joint assessment. So we look at the financing conditions, and we concluded that they remain favorable. And we do that on the basis on the inflation outlook. And as you rightly pointed out, our inflation outlook has been upgraded.
Now, the decision to slow the ECB's policy response to the pandemic follows a strong rebound in Eurozone growth and inflation. There's more business confidence across the continent as rising vaccination rates have helped end lockdowns and boost household and business activity. By comparison, the US Federal Reserve and the Bank of England have said that they plan to taper their asset purchasing programs by the end of the year. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
A Trans-Asian high-speed rail line linking China with Singapore is one of the most striking examples of cooperation between China and states within the ASEAN grouping. China is working with 3 members of that particular group, Laos, Thailand and Malaysia, to help build this huge network. Martin Lowe has been looking at the progress in Thailand, the vital midsection.
It's a massive undertaking and a true inter-country partnership. Thailand is carrying out the civil engineering, deciding the route, limiting environmental impact and preparing the ground. China, with its experience in high-speed networks, will lay the tracks, erect signals and supply the trains. At first, China will operate and maintain the system, but in future will hand over control to Thailand, remaining as an advisor. Trains will run at up to 250 kilometers per hour, transforming Thailand's aging rail network.
China is paying a lot of attention to this project, and we have good cooperation. It is seen as important because it is one of the first Chinese high-speed railways to be built outside of China. The first half of the line will be designed by China, but the second will be designed by Thailand to the Chinese standard.
Thailand's first high-speed route will run for 600 kilometers from the Laos border to the capital, Bangkok. Construction's going ahead daily on Phase 1, connecting Bangkok to the midpoint of the route here at Nakhon Ratchasima. Trains should be running by 2026. By the end of the decade, the line should be open all the way to the Laos border. The line through Laos, which will run at medium speed, is almost ready to open, whilst Malaysia says it remains committed to its part of the project. Thailand's rail scheme will cost up to $17 billion, but the country expects to see major investment and development along the route. Martin Low, CGTN, Nakhon Ratchasima, Thailand.
China is playing a key role in Brazil's efforts to vaccinate its people against COVID. The partnership between the two countries making a difference in the efforts to control the pandemic. Paulo Cabral has this report from Santo André.
Non-trial dose of the Coronavac vaccine was given this past January in Brazil thanks to a partnership between São Paulo's Butantan Institute and Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinovac Biotech. The cooperation began back in August 2019, before the pandemic. When the SARS-CoV-2 surfaced later that same year, those initial contacts made it easier and faster for the two countries to start working together in the Coronavac trials and then its distribution.
We need the vaccine to be protected from this disease, and if everyone does their job, we will soon be rid of this.
It seems like a worldwide union. We don't see that division we often see between peoples and countries. It feels as if everybody joined hands all over the world to fight this.
For now, the Butantan Institute imports the active ingredient of the vaccine from China to bottle and label it in their São Paulo production lines. But the deal with Sinovac Biotech includes transference of technology to begin full production of the vaccine here in Brazil next year.
Back in June, a delegation from the Sinovac headquarters made a visit to the construction site of the plant, which is expected to be up and running in 2022, with a capacity to produce as much as 100 million doses per year.
Since Coronavac is the whole virus that grow in cells, mammalian cells, and we have many other vaccines that can grow at the same way and can be produced at the same way, Butantan decided to have a multi-purpose facility to produce any kind of vaccine that is based on viral cells, that grow in cells.
Brazil is also expecting the arrival of another Chinese COVID-19 vaccine from CanSino Biolab, but the approval process has been delayed because the Chinese makers have cut ties with distributing partners in Brazil and not yet announced a replacement.
É uma vacina que tem uma tecnologia já de uma nova geração.
It's a vaccine which carries a new generation of technology. It has an adequate efficacy. Studies show good efficacy, so it's welcome here.
Vaccinations have been moving relatively fast in Brazil over the last couple of months, with almost 65% of the population having taken at least one dose. But many more are still needed to fully protect the country against COVID-19. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Santo André, Brazil.
Let's head over to the United Kingdom. The government there has rolled out a consultation that suggests it could water down your individual rights to challenge decisions made about you by algorithms in its post-Brexit data regime. In a 146-page consultation document published today, the UK Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport said that the need to provide a human review of AI decisions may, in future, it says, not be either practical or proportionate. In the UK's current implementation of the EU's General Data Protection Directive, you have a right to not be subject to solely automated decision-making processes with significant effects. The EU now set out its plans on how to regulate artificial intelligence back in April. The bloc underlined the need for European values and fundamental rights in implementing algorithms that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. Let's explore this proposal to remove the right to review decisions made about you, really, by algorithms that someone else happened to write. McCarthy joins us now live from London. So, Emma, the decisions that we humans make, right, like contracts, for example, court judgments, they're open for review by other parties. But why is the government saying that we should remove that option for decisions made effectively by programs?
Well, the UK has essentially suggested in this new report that the right for a human review could be removed. And this has all arisen as Brexiteers continue to push for the removal of EU data protection rules, including Article 22, which has long been a goal of theirs. Privacy groups have criticised the government's efforts to weaken these provisions. The Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport released a report today which calls for a number of reforms, but its ultimate aim is to, quote, create a more pro-growth and pro-innovation data regime whilst maintaining the UK's world-leading data protection. In the report, the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, Oliver Dowden, says that the reforms will keep people's data safe and secure while ushering in a new golden age of growth and innovation across the UK as it attempts to build back better. The consultation period for the report ends on November 19.
So the government task force is proposing replacing that option for direct human review of algorithmic outcomes with what it's describing as a legitimate or public interest test. But what exactly would that be?
So in their report, which was released in June, a task force, including Ian Duncan-Smith, reported its recommendations to Boris Johnson on how the UK can reshape its approach to regulation and seize new opportunities from Brexit with its newfound regulatory freedom. In this report, the task force says these legitimate or public interest tests would mean that proper consideration to the interests of the data owner had to be given in all instances of automated decision-making. Any new legislation to replace Article 22 would also need to consider that automated decision-making should not be based solely on explicit consent, which they say is too often given without understanding or as part of a contractual requirement that can't easily be refused. The task force says this would enable the use of data where a legitimate or public interest does exist, but where the process of collecting explicit consent from all the data subjects involved makes the use of AI untenable.
Indeed, certainly an interesting story. Keep a very close eye on it. McCarthy in London. Thank you. Now, the first Esports Championships East Asia have kicked off in Shanghai. More than 100 different contestants from China, South Korea and Japan will be playing 5 different kinds of games all the way through Sunday. Big event is one of the many ways Shanghai is trying to make itself the world's global esports center. Chen Tong explains.
There are not many people at the venue in person due to the pandemic. But as esports is all virtual, they are all able to tune in online to watch some 40 players representing China compete against the teams from South Korea and Japan. They'll be playing 5 games, including League of Legends and the Clash Royale.
My opponents are top players in their countries and are quite famous on the global stage. I'm looking forward to playing with them.
The competition was originally slated to be held in Seoul this year as an offline event, but eventually changed to online. Organizers say they hope the event can be held offline in China next year. Traditionally hosted by commercial interest, this is the first event of its kind to be hosted by governmental bodies.
We hope to form an esports association with other countries where competitions are held, in which China would have a speaking right. We hope this event can provide esports with a new structure of development, rather than it being just a commercial act.
These championships echo the city's plan to build itself into an esports center. The city has just released its 14th five-year plan for cultural development. One of its listed goals, to turn Shanghai into a hub where esports players and esports companies can flock to. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
Quick update from the world of commodities. Let's start with Baker Hughes rig count data for the week. It landed in the last few hours, up 6 units in the United States this week alone. On an annual basis, though, the surge in drilling rigs coming online is remarkable, nearly doubling over that period of time. Brent crude has locked in gains of around 40% so far this year. It seems to have found its feet around the low $70 a barrel range. Here's what's coming up next. We'll look at the story of a Ugandan tailor who switched to leather shoemaking in order to cope with supply chain disruptions after COVID.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Uganda. A group of tailors over there has found a way to alter their business model in order to cope with all the damage COVID-19 is inflicting across the economy. They say their secret is a material they're using. Hilary Ayesiga explores this from Kampala.
Willie Mwangi is designing craft shoes made from leather. It's a new material for Mwangi and a new product with promising returns.
Why I prefer these craft shoes, we can sell to the communities. And apart from this community, we were going around. We had some other boys who did not have work, some youth who did not have work at that lockdown. We were giving them the shoes. They were going around and selling them.
Mwangi used to design clothing made from fabric, but in April last year, he had to close down his business.
I was also affected by a pandemic because there was lockdown. There we saw at Chikubo, there was a lockdown. The shops were closed, and we were not traveling anywhere.
The COVID-19 lockdown also affected textile shipments into Uganda. So when he was able to reopen his shop, he started working with leather, which is readily available to make a number of finished products. Mwangi says he makes about 100 pairs of craft shoes per day, but it's still not enough to meet the growing demand of leather products on the market. Uganda has historically exported 90% of its leather. The Ugandan Tailors Association sees crafting the raw material into finished products as a great opportunity.
We are looking to see that we encourage our tailors to go into leather products because it's a wider business. And it has the wider market within the country and outside Uganda.
The association is also targeting the country's developing automotive industry.
When the pandemic came in, also, the innovations come in, because our automotive mobile buses from Chira, it's now in place. So we are also looking to see that we design the bus seats. So this also will drive us into a business, a bigger business.
But for Willie Mwangi and other independent tailors, the decision to venture into leather products is gradually helping their businesses to recover from the effects of the pandemic. He says He now receives regular orders from neighboring countries such as South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Hilary Isga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Finally, less than a week before the start of the new school year, Tunisian consumer rights organizations are denouncing the skyrocketing price of pretty much all school supplies, books and education in general. Basic education is free in Tunisia, but many parents are struggling to keep up with the indirect costs associated with taking their children to school. Here's CGTN's Adin Chouachi with this report.
Henda Rahal is a librarian from Tunis. She is also the co-owner of a school supplies shop in a popular neighborhood. She says that the skyrocketing price of all back-to-school items have affected her small business.
I'm selling back-to-school supplies and acknowledge that many items are expensive for ordinary parents who represent the majority of my clients. The inflation hit all sectors, including education. I'm trying to make deals during this period of the year, but books, notebooks, and all items cost more than before, while people don't have money. The rich, the middle class, and the poor complain. It's the same problem.
41-year-old Muhammad is a private sector employee who is struggling to make ends meet. He says that increased prices at the start of the new school year has a direct impact on people's purchasing power.
The prices of many school items have doubled since last year. I'm a poor man. I work to pay rent, the electricity and water bills. It's very difficult. My salary is too low to buy school bags for my 2 kids. I was lucky because this librarian agreed to split the costs over several months. She accepted to help me to send my kids to school.
The Minister of Education, Fathi Slauti, said that his department has printed 11.5 million books for all grade levels this summer. He added that a price hike was necessary this year because production costs are high, while the price of the subsidized items has not changed since 2008.
The global increase in the price of books is only 8.34%. It's not 25%, 30% or 40% as some people pretend. We were forced to make this slight price adjustment. The National Pedagogical Center is providing millions of subsidized books and notebooks. It regulates the market. The price of raw materials and paper and the real cost of school items is much higher than the selling price.
Tunisian President Kais Saied urged the Education Minister to ensure that the National Publishing Office can produce more subsidized books and notebooks and to supply enough school items so that all children can have their items before the start of the new year on September 15th. In partnership with the Education Ministry, hundreds of economic control agents from the Trade Department have launched a national campaign to control the prices of back-to-school items across Tunisia. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Quick update on the currencies for you. South Africa's rand is closing out the week at 2 months high. Effectively, it's back to levels that we last saw in June in the low 1410s to the dollar. Might we actually see it crossing over into the high 13s next week? We'll keep an eye on that. Kenya shilling is also enjoying a bit of a brief respite, under 110 to the dollar at the end of the week. And on the week when it was formally accepted as legal tender in Ecuador, Bitcoin continues its decline. It was nearly 2% lower at 1710 GMT, taking its decline since September started to around 3.3%. That's where we wrap up this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. Many ways to get your feedback back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.